They took your name, your land, your language, but not your legacy. Reclaim it at AfricanAncestry.com.
I heard you speak about this concept of the spiritual gym.
Yeah.
Can you please explain that?
Yeah, I think we find that we're often very intentional about many areas of life. I always think that in order for you to be healthy, you have to be spiritually well, relationally well, and then physically and mentally well, right? If any of those areas are off, everything is off. If any of those areas are vulnerable, everything is vulnerable. And so I think a lot of times when people talk about wellness, they talk about the physical, right? Like I need to make sure, the mental, they're like, I need to mentally be okay, or relationally, I need to be okay. But I think the idea that spiritually, the same relationship we have, the same intention we have, it has equal implications as every other area of our life, right? And so I thought to myself, I said, well, a lot of times people get frustrated about faith, especially when they think about faith, because it seems so abstract. Like, what am I working towards? If you ask somebody in a New Year's resolution, I'm trying to lose 50 pounds. I want to be healthy. It's very tangible. And I think for a generation which is like really has valued education, there's a difference between education and common sense, right? We're all liable, right? Whose values these things, we're often motivated by things measurable, measurable impact, right? Like, okay, it's great, whoop, like the digitized self. We see this even in the industry shifting, where now people got my Apple Watch on, I got my whoop on. I want to see my progress because you measure what matters. I can't manage what I don't measure. I think there's a view around recognizing, I think people have been more open in desperate times. People take desperate measures on how to be well. And they've realized, like, I think the spiritual is important, but it seems so abstract. I can't just get a sermon that makes me feel good and go on. How does this have impact practically for my day-to-day life? So part of the spiritual gym is actually just about intentionality, to say, in my areas of my spiritual walk, what are my goals? What are the steps I'm taking? It's just like a muscle, right? To pray, to have faith, there's an exercise of that, right? And so there are people who are not, people use the term, are you spiritually healthy? That means that there's a such thing as being spiritually unhealthy. What are the steps for me to maintain my spiritual health? And so I think it's taking the same dynamic around everything to say, I want people that be intentional in working towards something in a measurable way. And the idea was saying, in the same way that I deal with like a doctor's office in the beginning of the season, to say, all right, let's do a diagnostic, right? Almost like you would do a test, a diagnostic, to say, where are you, how things are from a prayer perspective? How are things in terms of just, your study of scripture? How are things in terms of just your faith? And I break down like basic areas of life financially, and then the spiritual implications. Where are you? And then based on what's happening in your life, okay, what are just 3 things we're going to focus on? And actually, it's like personal training in spiritual. It's okay, great, right? It seems like you're struggling to talk to God, or you're struggling to open up, or you don't have really space. You feel like really combusted, and there's a lot of things you can't express. So we're gonna have dedicated times of prayer. We're gonna work on this, and we're gonna work on your ability to do it. Some people, like, they pray consistently, but they don't know how to ever be mad at God. So I'm like, yeah, I could pray, but it's always like, Lord, I'm grateful. I'm like, but there's stuff going on in your life that you're angry. And part of your maturity spiritually for your health is being able to recognize that God can handle even your unhealthy thoughts, your unhappiness, your disappointment with him. He's big enough to handle that. So let's teach that, because that's going to have implications for your life, right? Or shoot, I'm still dependent. I don't have any self-control, right? When I want to say something, I say it. I've hurt people, right? Even exercise, even fasting. Fasting is about letting your physical man be weakened and your spirit man be strengthened. To say, everybody got to eat, and if you could regulate and say, you know what, for a spiritual matter, I'm lessening the power and the influence that this has over my being. Some people say, I can't help it. Oh, you can. So part of the way I strengthen it is one way is through fasting, right? So so these are things where I'm like, you're actually taking steps, and we're walking through like a doctor's office or like a personal trainer, and say, now you actually have a plan. Some people, it's the foundation. They're like, yo, my story was, I was in my 20s, man, and I'm like, Lord, I grew up going to church, but like it was more cultural. When I went to Presbyterian church, I know what was going on, but faith mattered. We prayed. It was a Christian home, but I didn't really know the Bible very well. And I remember I was just like, I always say, I thank God for everything in my life. And I remember being 27, I was in church, and the pastor was like, turn to the book of Micah. I didn't know where that thing was. And it was at one point where I'm just like, I talk about my intellect and God giving me all these things, but I've applied my I've applied my gift, my thinking, my mind to everything, anything and everything but my knowledge of God. And that flipped. And I think a lot of brothers and sisters relate to that, to be like, I feel so smart in my trade and what I do, but when it comes to faith, part of the reason why I don't jump into it is because I actually feel vulnerable. Like I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I think at that stage, I realized that I want to stop faking the funk. There are many brothers and sisters who are kind of like, I just need a plan. What do I start with? Right? Some people call it discipleship. And so I think part of that is like a spiritual gym to say, think about your health. Could you be perfectly healthy? People could always say like, no, there's always another level of health. That's spiritual health. Until God returns, until Jesus returns, you're jumping into a pool that's infinitely deep. Every day you're trying to get more and more healthy. And so in the same way that I'm not going to stop working out, I need to keep working out for the rest of my life and eating healthy, there's the same dynamic for your spiritual health to say, I need to have a goal. I need to work towards it because that's going to motivate me. But I also have to have healthy expectations. Am I going to arrive? Part of the reason I think some people struggle with faith is because I'm like, you feel like there's something that you don't graduate from.